What is the most severe case of someone being completely out of touch with reality you've ever seen? The pastor of a small town church insisted that members set up the parish hall and provide food and beverages for 125 people after every Sunday service, even though the average attendance was only around 20 people. Week after week, month after month, much food would be disposed of, and large urns of coffee dumped down the sink and all, because the pastor was in denial about the reality of weekly attendance. I will never forget the man who angrily told me, a wheelchair user with no feet and no prosthetics, to go down the stairs if I didn't want to wait for the elevator. I had been talking to my friend and mentioned we were going to be a little late because of the huge line. Parents of a 35 years old woman who was hospitalized after suffering severe anoxic brain damage 20 years ago. She had been in the same ward since, barely conscious. They refused to get her transferred to a more suitable facility for 20 years, saying that there's no reason to do so. Those facilities are for lost causes, and their daughter is going to make a full recovery, finish school, get married and be totally fine. Working in hospitals got me quite a collection of these stories, but this one I thought was one of the saddest ones. In college I had a roommate from the most sheltered part of Long Island. We met an exchange student from Switzerland, and I swear to God she said this in complete seriousness, "Oh wow, I didn't know people actually lived in Switzerland. I thought there were just banks there." This was from a regional manager of Starbucks, after they removed merit-based raises that could go up to a 5% increase, changed to a flat 2% increase. When she asked if people liked the new raise plan, I said actually no. They feel unmotivated with no reason to perform any better than just normal. Regional manager, your staff need to realize working isn't about money. My cousin was spoiled and sheltered her entire childhood through college. Then her parents stupidly cut the leash without any preparation and released her into society. She quickly got in trouble for bouncing checks all over town. My mom picked her up and asked why the hell she was writing bad checks everywhere. Turns out my cousin was under the impression that as long as you had checks in your checkbook, you had money in your account. She didn't understand that you deposit in a number and then can spend or withdraw up to that amount. Please teach your kids basic finance. Note, this was like 1996, before it turns into a who writes a check anymore discussion. There is a girl at my work that always bitches about not making enough BC. She makes 200, 300 a paycheck, then is always the first to leave early and always shows up late, and has other PPL take her shifts. She asked me how I make 600, 800 a paycheck. I said BC, I work more. I'm currently at work taking over her shift. She doesn't realize, if you don't work more you'll be paid less. My sister grew up with everything handed to her, and literally cried when her first car wasn't the color she wanted. Married Rick. Can't fathom why I can't take off work whenever it suits me, and says stuff like I wouldn't ask my boss for a week off. I would tell him I'm taking the week off. Work with a girl who is a flat earther, and on top of that denied the existence of space. When the topic came up and I disagreed, she asked if I had ever been there. Obviously I haven't. I told her I have also never been to Japan, and that does not mean it doesn't exist. She complained to management about my intolerance of her beliefs. My old boss at the time was a girl of 26 who got $4 million from her mom a year to play with. Her mom is very wealthy in China. Her daughter is here trying to be a CEO of a company for funsies. I accidentally got a job at that company. One day she told us we were all going on a group outing for bonding. She took us to an outlet mall 4 hours away, told the rest of us 7 people that she was going to go shop and she'd see us later. That was code for don't follow me. Frickers. Every 2 hours she'd let us know she was going to go and load her bags to the giant van they rented, and would group text us telling us we can meet her there to unload as well. We all get paid under 50k. We have nothing to unload. By lunch she had proceeded to fill up the van with crap. She then asks me where all my new stuff is, and I said I'm budgeting right now. She goes take out a credit card and go shop. That's the American way. Seriously. Okay. By 9 PM her bags were taking up people's seats, and they had to sit with her stuff. She spent 30k. The rest of us spent about $70. We were tired and bored and cold. To this day I still believe she thinks she did something nice for us, and doesn't understand how polarizing and not at all team bonding that was. My parents paid for half the down payment on my house, pay for our landscaper, house cleaner, child daycare, car insurance, and give my wife and our monthly allowance. We are completely self-sufficient human beings who even try and give other friends financial advice. Obviously written in the voice of someone I know. Had a friend who insisted she was in a relationship with a C-list celebrity whom she met once during a comic convention. All the celebrity's Instagram and Twitter posts were for her and everything had a meaning behind it. When the celebrity got married, she said that it was just for the media, so she and celebrity could live a quiet life. When he didn't do anything for her birthday, she had a breakdown. She went to therapy not long after. My sister-in-law, kicked out by her boyfriend, comes to stay with us for a few days. We suggest looking for a flat/cheap house to rent near us. She won't live in the scummy part of town near us. She'd like a 3-bed house with garden in the best part of town. She has no savings and isn't sure if she has a job, was a part-time cashier in a supermarket. Stopped going to work when COVID came. Note, not furloughed. Supermarket still open. She's just not going in. When I suggested maybe she couldn't afford PS 500k on a family home on her salary, she suggested she just get a council house, disregarding the huge waiting list and the fact that most council properties are either ghetto parts of town. This is just the crust of a deep layer of unhinged fantasy world that she lives in. My parents' neighbor thought that her garden was too small for her sons to play in. So when she met my parents for the first time, the first thing she actually said was, "Can you give me some of your garden so my sons have more space to play in?" Thankfully my parents just said no. For context, they live in a very expensive neighborhood where houses cost on average from PS 750,000 to PS 1 million. The gardens in that neighborhood are a lot bigger on average than the majority of gardens in the UK. I've never heard a story of somebody being as painfully out of touch as that woman. Edit. There's a lot of comments from Americans clarifying what our gardens actually are. A British garden is what you guys call a backyard. My stepbrother got into a weird Gnostic religious group and thought he could convert people by talking to them, harassing them, Socrates style, except without any ability to carry out a philosophical conversation. Also assuming workplace is a fine occasion to do this. When he'd get fired from his temp jobs he'd assume it's a conspiracy and fight against enlightenment. This is more funny than deluded as a side note. But one of the group activities is to have to rewrite their religious book by hand, which he diligently did, and it wasn't a small book either. Turned out he used the wrong coloring which for some reason invalidated the whole thing. Got a job in a restaurant as a waiter. Assumed for whatever unimaginable reason that the proper way to act for waiters is to bow after taking the order. When his supervisor asked him to stop he lectured the supervisor on proper waitstaff manners. Wanted to propose to a 50-plus-year-old woman who has until then shown no signs of being interested in him. Luckily he believed in the tradition to first ask father's permission, so he asked his dad who talked him out of it. Had an idea to join the military to convert them from the inside. At one point believed the sun rays can sustain you, but luckily never really bothered to practice it. Is totally against capitalism and wants to live a free life as a wandering philosopher, rather than live as a working drone like everyone else. However does believe the working drones in his family should support his noble pursuit, while also chastising them for selling out, and more. I used to work at a software company in downtown Boston. One of the best perks of the job at the time was the flexibility in hours. Many folks had regular WFH days. Myself, I knew I could drop my kids off at school, get into the office by 9:30 and my boss had no issue with it whatsoever. Others with kids had similar arrive late or leave early schedules depending on their childcare. After a few years a new CEO comes in, spends a month observing how the office works, then calls for a company-wide meeting. During the meeting she tells everyone she believes having a full office 8-5 is the most productive environment. And at the start of the next month, all WFH was cancelled, and she wanted everyone in the office during those set hours. No showing up late or leaving early. A lively debate ensued. with discussions of there being very little warning, to pleas of flexibility, to concerns of making necessary childcare arrangements, especially given that in many cases, that is, schools, we couldn't adjust those times. Plus, commuting into Boston sucks. After listening to all of these arguments, she finally responds with a long speech of appreciating the sacrifices everyone has to make to better the company, everyone doing their part, blah blah blah. She ended by saying, "I understand where you're all coming from. Years ago when my kids were little, my husband and I had to hire 3 nannies to cover all of the times we had to work. I remember we all looked around at each other, speechless. It was also the moment I realized I would have to start looking for another job." When the millionaire CEO thinks hiring 3 nannies is a relatable example to her middle class employees, it's pretty clear she's not going to change her mind. Edit. Holy crap. I've been on Reddit for 5 years and never gotten more than 100 or so upvotes on a post before. I believe this is also where I say thank you kind stranger for my first gold. I worked on shifts with a guy for years who thought every single person was out to get him. I've never met anyone who had such a warped sense of reality. He would joke on with someone, then go away for the weekend and stew on one particular thing, then come in on Monday absolutely raging over taking something the complete wrong way. I've seen him attack 2 people and heard about a third. Thing is, he's so dopey. Everyone thinks he's harmless and that's just the way he is. A guy I trained as an apprentice has just started on shifts with him. Doesn't take anyone being a peen well at all. I think they'll do well together, haha. I went to a private international school in London as a teenager. Most kids there had parents working good jobs, but in between them were some filthy rich kids with parents in the oil industry or something similar. In 8th grade we were talking about our Easter break and my friend from Belgium was talking about how his family had decided last minute to go there over the break, but had decided to drive there because there were no flights available. Then this Russian billionaire classmate of mine asked him, "Why don't you take a private jet?" She was so clueless when we started laughing. Edit. Grammar. A woman I knew a few years ago. She had a job. She was convinced she was supposed to be a movie star. She never did any acting, though. She also told me about the married man that she had slept with. He loves me, but he can't leave his wife. She actually did stop having sex with him, but they still hung out. One bully of a boss asking the 3 people who suffered most from his behavior if they would want to move to a new employer with him as a team. HMM. How about no way in hell? I knew someone who unironically tried to convene that not only is Pokemon demonic, but they exist in real life and there are reported cases of them attacking and harming people. An ex became really religious, and I'd still talk to her sometimes. Somehow the topic of flat earth theories came up, and she said she thinks it's actually possible that it could be true. I tried to explain that we have more than enough imagery and data indicating that the earth is round, and she said it could all be planted there by Satan. You just can't come up with a response to that. My soul legit believes she's a strong, independent businesswoman who owns 3 major businesses. She does 3 MLM gigs. Edit. Thanks for the silver. The irritating thing is that I actually do have a brick and mortar business that I've been running for 5 years now, and she's always giving me business advice and pushing me to join her for these amazing opportunities. It's so stereotypically obnoxious. OMG hun, I totally understand the grind. Yeah, I bet you do. All said while wearing brightly horrendous outfits, caked on macup, and smelling like decaying frankincense. My friend stole my card information and bought loads of expensive stuff. I asked her if it was her before reporting it, knowing that she was going through a tough time and I wanted to give her a chance to make it right and that I could be in trouble for conspiracy to fraud if I reported it, and they believed I'd got stuff delivered to my friend to claim fraud for the money back. She said no, I thought someone else had done it, so I reported it. When she got arrested she said she didn't think they'd take the fraud thing so far. She thought you could just call up banks to get the money back and they wouldn't investigate. Browsing Reddit provides me a daily dose of people completely out of touch with reality. My friend suffered a psychotic break when we were teenagers. He'd been smoking weed constantly for a couple of weeks. not eating or sleeping. And I think he had some underlying mental health issues anyway, but that routine just sent him over the edge. Before his parents had him admitted to hospital, he came and met us before we were going out to a gig. He was wearing a pink silk pajama shirt and jogging bottoms and just looked very unwell. He was rambling on about the discoveries he was making and that he was going to meet some scientist in America. Then he laid on the pavement in the middle of the street and told us we all had to lie down to conserve the Earth's energy. That was about 15 years ago. He runs a successful business now. I was a stable hand of a very upper tier barn in a wealthy part of the country. The staff have to sign non-disclosure agreements to protect clients. On one particularly scorching July day, I overheard a client venting to another about how she was incredibly stressed and going to have a mental breakdown because her first choice catering company was all booked up for the weekend of her last minute yacht party. I'm paycheck to paycheck and had probably a total of 3 days off since Christmas. I would love for a yacht party to be my basis for a mental breakdown. Needless to say, the staff had a healthy chuckle on that one. I'm fairly convinced that my current shift supervisor thinks anyone who works an overtime shift is doing it out of loyalty to the company and not because of the 1.5x pay rate. Streamer that I watched a couple of times before his behavior drove me to stop. It was a shame because when he was actually gaming, I liked the content, but his attitude drove you up the wall, and by attitude, I mean raging back when I watched him. The rest of the events in this post hadn't happened yet, but the out of touch with reality part he talked about his girlfriend on stream a few times. Nothing wrong with that, except his girlfriend was a female streamer who lived in Europe. He was from the States and he'd never actually met her in his life. She got wind of this through shared viewers and debunked the story on her stream, saying she'd never even interacted with him. This caused him to go nuts and start stalking the girl wherever he could, causing her to eventually stop streaming, delete all her social media and so on. After his Twitch account was banned for this, he eventually managed to convince Twitch to UN ban him and then did the same thing to a different girl. Now he's been permanently banned from Twitch as a result of this again and keeps raging about it on Twitter. Just to clarify, I don't follow this guy, but someone posts about him on the game subreddits every now and then, which is why I know the story. Some people are just bananas. Alright, so this is a story of the first hearing I ever been to. My adversary was represented by an established solo attorney from a different state. We will call him Jude. I had spoken to him a few times over the phone before and considered him competent and a passionate advocate. So I meet Jude at the courthouse with co-counsel. I'm a woman, and so is she, to basically shoot the crap waiting for trial call. First thing Jude says, "Hi." Second thing, "I gotta show you a picture of my wife." Okay, now, Jude is in his early 60s, small, bald. He takes out his phone and shows us a photo of this little girl who he assures us is 20, but looks all of 15. He tells us she's from Dominica. As we stare at him, he unpromptedly relates to us a hilarious anecdote about going to the mall and her begging him to buy her stuff while calling him daddy. You see, Jude thought we would be impressed. We were not impressed. This is my time to shine. So I grew up with a lot, or restrictions that at the moment, had no idea the options existed. For example, I was only allowed 2 options of shoes, but the catch was that I need to make the right choice, or that I can make friends on my own, not needing to be told this is your new friend now so go play with them. Sadly, my dad kept me in a small box, and he was the only one allowed to control what would go into that box or come out. So when I was 10, CPS was involved and was taken into foster care. That's when my world exploded. I didn't know truly how bad it was until they took me to a shoe store and told me to pick out ones I liked. I swear for the life of me, I had no clue what to do. I stood there for what felt was hours until they noticed and asked what my favorite color was. I said green, because that was what my father told me I liked. But I guess I was too overwhelmed that I just remember saying yes to everything and ended up with ugly brown and pink sneakers. What children learn to do at their normal age is what I'm just figuring it out in my 20s. So reality was a hard thing to live because the whole time I was in my dream world. My father, He is an habitual liar. I somehow think he believes his own lies. Over the past couple of years I've noticed he doesn't actually have anything new to say. Sort of regurgitates sentences in slightly different ways. It's caused his business to fail. He lied to everyone that was employed there, saying he had to liquidate the company, going so far as to tell people he met with lawyers and the process has been started. I did some digging and found out there were no lawyers or liquidation. He just tried to duck the system. I have no contact with him, but my brother says he is still trying to use the same tactics. I just feel he believes everything. Sort of like living in his own head. Very sad that he damaged lives in the process. My boss's wife, 28. She grew up in a wealthy family and married to a man who was third generation owning the company he was in. They were a regional power, etc. She was talking to a staff that in general made 36k a year, mumbling about a staffer who was on his honeymoon. Tennessee. Ha. Tennessee. She looked around the room for everyone to join in. My god. How did she agree to that? We did Hawaii and that was least I told him was acceptable. I had a fat, ugly, unemployed friend who believed he deserved a perfect 10 girlfriend. He only asked out women that were way out of his league. It was so cringy. He truly had no self-awareness. In the club he would walk up to supermodel types and ask them out and would come back angry when he was, always, shot down. He eventually moved to Brazil because he was convinced American women were too smug to appreciate his excellence. And the crazy thing was that he wasn't just playing any confidence is sexy game or anything. He 100% believed in this. He saw himself as a god. My stepfather's grandpa suffered from psychosis in a strange way. He wasn't able to distinguish mirror reflections from real life. He would often be found talking to the mirrors, his reflection, for hours. Later on, he wasn't allowed to have any mirrors because he would believe that that man was there to kill him and often would turn violent. Turn violent as in he would start punching and clawing against the mirrors. I had a neighbor once that was convinced I was flirting with him and wanted to be with him. He got all of this from the one-word verbal exchange we would have while getting our mail, which was basically saying hi. Keep in mind that at the time I was a minor in high school and he was probably well into his 20s. He proceeded to harass and stalk me. Examples: messaging me on Facebook declaring his love for me and feeling wronged because I was playing hard to get. He would knock at our house door when he knew my parents weren't home and tried to lure me out so that he could just talk to me. Searched me up on all my social media accounts and tried to contact me. He used my last name from our mailbox and searched for me. It did not help that we lived in the same building. I got so scared that I could no longer go outside for a run like I usually did. I filed a police report and his family asked mine to please forgive his son. This completely freaked me out and my family decided to move. Edit to clarify. I had just turned 16 and the guy was probably 25, 26-year-old at the time this happened. At the risk of giving an answer that's too real, my grandmother with Alzheimer's. We're in the stages now where it's basically a given that she's not aware of what's going on. She'll ask about people who aren't there, reference things that didn't happen, or get fussy because she's late for something that occurred years ago. Don't get me wrong, it's hard, but it's nowhere near as hard as it was a few years back. Now, it's easier to deal with entirely because it's easier to disregard what she's saying and we're all better practiced at it. A few years ago, when she didn't remember my name for the first time, or when she remembered that she should recognize me but was lucid enough to try and hide the fact she didn't recognize me, that was difficult. So now, it's safe to say that she's not terribly in touch with our modern settings, but she's still very friendly and I feel like I have a duty to make sure she's not lonely or scared. I dated this girl who believed her roommates were spying on her, that every time they had friends over and were hanging out in the common space and laughing, it was because they were spying on her in her room. She also believed the government was spying on her and her parents directly. Us dating lasted about a week and ended, not just because the red flags, but because she tried to drop by unannounced after only being on a couple dates. Working in a pharmacy. Hello. Can I get the yellow ones please? Sorry, could I get your name first? It doesn't matter. I just need the yellow round ones. Did you have a prescription? No. I always get them here, little yellow round ones. It went on like this for literally 20 something minutes. Here's what I found out in that time. By little yellow round ones, he meant red/orange circular Xarelto tablets. He had been on a lower dose a couple of years ago. He had not filled the yellow ones in over 18 months. There was one dispense tech who knew his name and knew his doctor. By sheer coincidence, she'd greeted him every time he came in for the last 2-3 years. He physically had no idea how a pharmacy works. He'd only even been to this one. Only ever picked up one medication, and only through one tech who knew the doctor sent his scripts through every few months. It was surreal, explaining reality to somebody who by pure fortune had never experienced it. All these people that think that the coronavirus is a made-up disease or is being spread by 5G towers. My brother told me I'm avoiding Asian people if I see them on the street or anything, you know, for safety because of the coronavirus. He's Asian. Our entire family is Asian. My cousin's wife got very sick while we were at a wedding in Mexico because she drank no water, only alcohol. She said, there were ice chips in my drinks, so I thought it was enough. Anyways, she complained because at the hospital some of the staff didn't speak English. You're in a Spanish speaking country. I'm half Native American, of the northern Paiute and Washoe tribes, and whenever I meet new people, they always ask what ethnicity I'm as I look very ambiguous, and when I say native, sometimes they say, oh wow, I didn't know Native Americans still existed. Kinda sad. Me thinking that I can do things that I like with my money. My mother, and several people in my family, believe that God marks people. If someone ultimately has a good soul, they're white, and I'm sure you can guess where it goes from there. If only non-white did crappy things, that would make sense, but you don't even have to look at much of the world to see that is not the case. When I try to bring up that tons of white people do awful things, her logic is they're lost souls that will eventually find their way. Meanwhile, she'll believe a non-white will never find their way, even if they act like they have. The level of delusion this takes is one of the most frightening things to me. Quite mild compared to everything else on here, but my college classmate comes to mind. Let's call him R. R is very out of touch. A case of the classic sheltered rich kid who's never experienced the real world. R started his college career by using racial slurs and swearing at people, apparently thinking that was okay. It was not, and he was reported several times before he finally got the message and stopped. Okay, at least he stopped, right? Surely the problem is now over? Oh. Wait, he says he'll have no problem buying a house. Given that there is a housing crisis, this will be interesting to watch. And he wants his first job to pay him PS 50,000 salary, otherwise he will kill himself. He hasn't yet realized that your first job will almost always be at the bottom of the hierarchy and you'll very rarely be paid PS 50,000. R also thought that it would be very easy to become an English teacher in Japan. In his words, you just fly over and speak English and they'll hire you. He hasn't considered that he will need other things, such as what was it, oh yeah, a teaching degree. He also hasn't considered that others might apply to be English teachers in Japan and he'll have to compete with them. Edit. Actually, he apparently doesn't need a degree, but he'll still find it hard because, apparently, finding a place to live can be rather difficult. Although, possibly the worst part is his weird obsession with Hitler. He keeps going on about Hitler being right, and when we protest, he says we're just being snowflakes, apparently. Disapproving of someone saying that the genocide of 11 million was right is just being a snowflake. When we further explain the difference between being moral and being a snowflake, are countered by telling us that morals are just made by snowflakes for snowflakes, and that he has a right to freedom of speech. That classic go-to excuse for people who are being called out for bad behavior. So yeah, I reckon R is the person I've met who is most out of touch with reality due to his winging it attitude towards general life and his twisted sense of morality and lack of empathy. Edit. I found out from the comments that the Holocaust's death toll was actually closer to 11 million and not 6 million. I'm so sorry for my lack of knowledge about this, and I feel real bad. that I didn't know how terrible it really was. To anyone who may have been offended by my inaccuracy, I sincerely apologize and will make sure I have all the facts next time. I have now changed the number. I've also been receiving comments that teaching in Japan is as easy as our claims, but I've had a couple that have said it's actually quite hard, so I can't really tell if I was right or wrong about this one. However, all of those comments agreed that a degree is not needed, so whoops, I was wrong with that one as well. I've added a note in the corresponding paragraph about my error,